Have you ever felt like life ripped everything away from you before you understood who were you? Mephibosheth did not know the war. I didn't know he hated neither the intrigues of power. It was just a 5-year-old boy, son of a brave called Jonathan, grandson of the first king of Israel, Saul. His life was spent within the walls of the palace, where the echoes of glory and promises were his cradle. For him, everything seemed written in gold, a royal lineage, a secure future, a powerful identity, until in one day, everything broke. The news arrived as a lightning. His father and his grandfather had fallen into battle. For a moment, his world was filled with screams, footsteps hasty, decisions made in panic. His nurse it took in arms and ran, but while they escaped, the tragedy fell, a simple, tragic, and definitive fall. His legs were marked forever, and with them their destiny. From that moment on, Mephibosheth disappeared from the map. It vanished from the history, as if it were Bible, same it I would have forgotten. But it wasn't the only one. In every generation, there is who fall young and feel condemned to silence, heirs to promises that seem broken, souls who believe have been discarded. This is the story of one of them. But it is also the history of all those who were ever torn from where they belonged. Because Mephibosheth not only represents a biblical character, represents a wound, a weight, and a promise that still beats in the heart of the king. And if you pay attention, you might discover that this story, it is also the yours. In his Saul's palace, every corner spoke of the future. The royal robes, the shining shields, the corridors where they resounded the footsteps of the soldiers. There, a child called Mephibosheth, learning to walk, under the proud gaze of his father, Jonathan. He was not a child, anyone. It was him, grandson of the king, heir to a blood that ruled Israel. All in his life screamed purpose, legacy, destiny, but the history not always go on the strokes we imagine. One day, while the sun was setting after the hills of Jezreel, arrived the news: Saul and Jonathan were dead. The enemy had won. And they also fell to the eyes of the dynasty that led the nation. The palace, which previously offered security, turned into a deadly armadillo. In half from chaos, his nurse it raised in arms. He didn't think, he just ran. He went downstairs, crossed hallways, escaped of the horror that had not yet arrived, but was already felt in the air. And it was there, in that desperate flight, where it happened, it unthinkable. Mephibosheth fell. It was an epic fall. There was no enemies, swords or glory. It was a silent, accidental fall, but irreversible. His feet were damaged, his legs would never support him again, and so the heir became an invalid, the future in shadow, the prince in charge. But that fall wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Mephibosheth fell from the throne to anonymity, Hugapai in absence, from a clear identity to a silence that will never leave again. It was as if the world said, you no longer belong here. And how many pages or weight of a car are similar, maybe not in your legs, but in your soul? A loss, a rejection, a trauma that made you feel kem eram. The story of Mephibosheth comes as one thing. But as we will see, it does not end there. After the fall, Mephibosheth's world went out. There was no palace, no throne, no honor, just a land distant, dry and forgotten, Lodbar. A place whose name means without grass, without word, without promise. There, in the exile, grew he grandson of the king, not as a prince but as someone hidden. His name was not mentioned in the corridors of power. No one asked for him. It was as if had ceased to exist, a living ghost of a fallen dynasty, Lodabar. It wasn't just geography. It was a state of soul. It was the silence that screams when no more credits voce. It was to Poera that copper your dreams. Ali, Mephibosheth learned to live like Medo, fear of being discovered, medo of being rejeitado de novo, meso de que sua existência fosse uma ameaça, and with his fear, whined the shame. shame of not being able to walk, shame of not being able to fight like his father, shame of being a reminder of a cursed past. Every dawn in Lodebar was a repeat of the yesterday. There was no progress, only survival. No one spoke of the future. It was barely an attempt to forget the past. But the soul does not forget. Even when the body adapts, the heart keeps screaming for what was lost. And how many live today in his own Lodebar? There are Lodebars emotional, where they take refuge the wounded who no longer expect anything. There are Lodebars spiritual, where the faith withers in silence. There are people who, like Mephibosheth, have convinced themselves that there is no longer a place for them in the history, that the called it was for others. The banquet of life is already served, and they were not invited. But what Mephibosheth didn't know was that even in Lodebar there was a living promise, a word not forgotten, an eternal covenant that lay dormant, waiting for the moment to awaken. Because the silence of Lodebar isn't the end. It's the echo that precedes a powerful voice, the voice of the king. The weather happened. The throne changed hands. David, the shepherd who converted in king, ruled from Jerusalem with justice and power. His kingdom prospered, his enemies fell, and their name was feared and respected. But a day between victories and advice, his heart was invaded by a question that did not come from logic, but from loyalty. Is there still any left? Someone from the house of Saul, so that he do mercy for the sake of Jonathan. It wasn't a political question. It was a question of the soul, a promise, made years ago, sealed between tears and swords, between two friends who loved each other like brothers. David had not forgotten, and when love does not forget, promise becomes bridge between past and future. Someone mentioned Ziba, former servant of the house of Saul, brought before him king. Is there still some descendant of Saul? Ziba replied with caution, yes, there is a son of Jonathan, crippled in both feet. Let us note how it is presented, not because of its name, not by his lineage, but by his limitation, as if his disability was his identity. But David didn't hesitate. He didn't ask if it was useful, if it was strong, if it was dangerous. He just said, bring it to me. This order is silent, because the king did not shamu Mephibosheth for merit. He or she shamu because of an alliance, an ancient promise that still has life. And that promise was greater than a promise, greater than a shame, greater than Lodebar. In that moment, without him, it knew, Mephibosheth was remembered. While lived silently, the pact spoke for him. While he was hiding, the funny it was looking for. Because when the king remembers, things begin to move, and nothing can arrest what is born from an eternal promise. The morning was the same as all the others. Lodebar, silence, routine, resignation, until an unusual sound broke, the calm, horses' hooves, soldiers' voices, real movement. Mephibosheth looked out the window. His heart stopped. It was not necessary to be a prophet to know, vinum puerile. For an instant, everything that had been saved for years took shape. His body, fragile, began to tremble. I thought I was running away, but my legs didn't move anywhere. Either past had or found. And in human logic he knew what this meant. The king was eliminating the descendants of the ancient dynasty, and he was the last. When the soldiers entered, there was no fight, just a broken man who accepted your destiny. The trip was long, not only because of the distance, but by the weight of the fear. Every step toward Jerusalem was a farewell to his hidden life, and perhaps to his life itself. Upon arriving before David, Mephibosheth fell on his face. "Here is your servant," he said with a broken voice, without dare to look at the king's eyes. But what he heard next made no sense at all. The world of logic, nor of power, nor of politics. Don't be afraid. The king, who could to have it destroyed, it raised with words. "I'm going to give you back all the lands of your grandpa Saul, and you will always eat at my table." Silence. Disbelief. Was this a trap? A cruel taunt? But no. It was real. Mephibosheth replied with modesty, "Who is your servant, that you should look upon a dead dog like me?" His words revealed how he saw himself same, alienated, skewed, worthless, like many leaves. But David did not respond with correction or reproach. Don't try to convince him of your value, barely accolou, because Graça does not need to justify anything. She is barely old, and when the funny speaks, he past is silenced. The palace, it was no longer a place of escape. Now, Mephibosheth crossed his runners not as an enemy, but as a guest. Ainda assim, each step, Umalor each drag, carregava dúvidas. How to live in a place that one day was like, and now or received like a stranger. But David didn't treat him like a stranger. He ordered that all of Saul's lands be restored to him. Deus servos, provisão, proteção, but something even more radical. He has a place at his own table. Not as a subject, not as beneficiary. How to file every day. Mephibosheth sat at the king's table. On either side are two princes, two gentry, two wise men. Their legs spread apart, covered with royal mantles. They were not visible to you. These holidays are not defined here, or what a louder palaver it was to Graça. And that is powerful, because the king's table is a symbol of belonging. This is the place where the ravines are treated as whole, where the split ones become centered, where what was lost is restored, not just materially, but emotionally, spiritually, identity-wise. Mephibosheth was not physically cured. His legs will continue to be injured, but something deeper was healed, his soul. With each refreshment he relearned what he was. With each convert he rebuilt his dignity. With each king's eyes he understood, I am worth it, not because of what I do, but because of who I am, who I'm. How many of us live with broken legs, spiritually failing? How many believe that they are not worthy of the table because they do not walk like before, because they fall, because they are marked as peelers? Davy's table represents Pai's table, and she continues post, not for the perfect ones, but for those who respond to the chamado, the same trembling, the same broken. Mephibosheth teaches us that being at the king's table is not about merit, it is about grace. The story of Mephibosheth is not over in the table of the king. In fact, there it was where it truly began, because beyond the reclaimed lands and food served, what was restored was his identity. For years he had defined himself by his fall, so he couldn't do for what he had lost. But in the presence of the king, he discovered something that Lodebar never could offer you, your true value. And this is where your history intersects with the our. All in at some point we have fallen. Some fall in the form of traumas, others in the form of abandonment, illness, failure, or mistakes that still they weigh. Sometimes we hide like Mephibosheth, convinced that there is no place for us anymore, in none palace. That we were forgotten, that what we are is no longer enough. We live in modern-day Lodebars, quiet apartments where sadness hides, churches filled with people broken inside, hearts no longer waiting to be called. But there is one truth we cannot ignore. The king is still calling. No, because let us be useful. Not because let us be strong, but because he is faithful to his promise. There is an eternal covenant, sealed in love, which cries out for us even when we no longer have strength to cry out. Do you feel broken? Do you feel far away? Guilty? Unworthy? Listen, you are not defined by your fall, but by the call of the king. Like Mephibosheth, you can approach trembling. You can believing that you don't deserve anything, but when you arrive, you will discover that already there is a place reserved for you name. A chair in the table, a place where your wounds will not be your presentation, but scars honored by the funny, because this is not just the story of a forgotten prince, it is the history of all those who day were found. Mephibosheth began his life as a prince, fell as an orphan, lived as an exile, and ended up redeemed by the funny. His history is not a footnote in the scriptures, it is a spiritual mirror, treat. A letter that even when everything seems lost, there are promises that continue to echo our dreams. David could be tough, politics could be ignored, the story could be turned off, but the alliance for lava higher. And when the king was removed from the promise, the exiled was restored. Maybe you are living in your own Lodabar. Maybe it has been oiled so that it remains unfinished. But there is a voice that aimed at Chama, an alliance that is still working. Umre, who is still preparing the table, no matter how far you are, no matter what, no matter how deep you have fallen, no matter how many times you have saying, I don't deserve. Grace does not listen that kind of arguments. Listen this. There is a place with your name on it, not because you are strong, but because the king is faithful. And when he call, everything changes. Now it's your turn. Where is your load bar? What fall defined your story? Are you ready to answer the call of the king? If this story touched your heart, if you saw something of yourself in Mephibosheth, don't keep it to yourself. Like and share this video with someone who also needs to return to the table, and subscribe for more stories that heal, awaken, and restore, because still there is living promises, and the king still remembers.